This is part 2. My video stopped recording at 30 minutes for some odd reason. But this is the U.S. postage stamp commemorating the bicentennial of the Lewis and Clark expedition under President Thomas Jefferson. The expedition mapped western land all the way to Oregon for the young United States. Okay. Y'all, I'm just going to read a little more. I'm going to try to read some every night, about 30 minutes, maybe an hour, because once it gets interesting, it's like, got to finish. But I don't have a lot of time, but I will do this. Try to keep up with it every night, if not 2-3 times a week, just so we can get through the information. Now, relations between settlers and Native Americans, who were called Indians, were an uneasy mix of cooperation and conflict. Certain areas saw trade and some social interaction, but in general, as the new settlements expanded, the Indians were forced to move, often after being defeated in battle. Settlement of the colonies was directly sponsored not by the British government, but by private groups. All except Georgia emerged as companies, the Corporation of America, of shareholders, or as proprietorships chartered by the king. Some were governed regionally by company leaders, but in time all developed a system of participatory government based on British legal precedent and tradition. Years of political turmoil in Britain culminated with the Glorious Revolution of 1688 through 89. That deposed King James II and led to limits on the monarchy and greater freedoms for the people. The American colonies benefited from these changes. Colonial assemblies claimed the right to act as local parliaments. Let me get it to the top. Sorry. Hold on. They passed measures that limited the power of royal governors and expanded their own power. Okay, so they passed measures, laws that limited the power of royal governors, people that were already here, the indigenous rights, and expanded their own power. Now, over the decades that followed, recurring disputes between the governors and assemblies awakened colonists to the increasing divergence between American and British interests. The principles and precedents that emerged from these disputes became the unwritten constitution of the colonies. At first, the focus was self-government within a British Commonwealth. Only later came the call for independence. So not only did they take over and were in partnership, then later on they figure, oh, it's so good right here that we don't want them in our pockets, so we're gonna just separate. They not over here doing all the hard work, when the real is they weren't either. Like, they were invading and got real greedy. Cutting the people, the indigenous, out of the deal, cutting their power, and they came with guns, And like I said, this was after wars, usually. So we were still fighting, but they had guns. Okay, so what I'm going to do is see how long these two are. Hold on. Okay. Well, I can read 2 more, which is I'm just going to read 2 more, and then I'm going to cut it off. I'm going to try not to go outside. I don't want to be lazy, but I do like to learn, because a lot of this stuff these brothers are way more into, so they can give us a better understanding. Okay. And this is the road to independence. Now, the principles of liberalism and democracy, the political foundation of the United States sprang naturally from the process of building a new society on virgin land. Just as naturally, the new nation would see itself as different and exceptional. Europe would view it with apprehension or hope. Britain's 13 North American colonies matured during the 1700s. They grew in population, economic strength, and cultural attainment. They were, wiping out our culture and adding their own. They were experienced in self-government. Yet it was not until 170 years after the founding of the first permanent settlement at Jamestown, Virginia, that the new United States of America emerged as a nation. War between Britain and France in the 1750s was fought partly in North America. Britain was victorious and soon initiated policies designed to control and fund its vast empire. These measures imposed greater restraints on the American colonists' way of life. The Royal Proclamation of 1763 restricted the opening of new lands for settlement. The Sugar Act of 1764 placed taxes on luxury goods, including coffee, silk, and wine, and made it illegal to import rum because they wanted to start, making their own, of course. The Currency Act of 1764 prohibited the printing of paper money in the colonies. The Quartering Act of 1765 forced colonies to provide food and housing for royal troops. And the Stamp Act of 1765 required the purchase of royal stamps for all legal documents. The, what do they call it? Notarization. We need you to, look at this and make it legal. Stamps for all legal documents, newspapers, licenses, and leases. Wow. Colonists objected to all these measures, but the Stamp Act sparked the greatest organized resistance. The main issue in the eyes of a growing number of colonists was that they were being taxed by a distant legislator in which they could not participate. In October 1765, so this were what the British making their money and making the rules from afar. And they were fighting this. Okay. So in October 1765, 27 delegates from 9 colonies met in New York to coordinate efforts to get the Stamp Act repealed. They passed resolutions asserting the individual colonies' right to impose their own taxes. Self-government produced local political leaders, and these were the men who worked together to defeat what they considered to be oppressive acts of Parliament. After they succeeded, their coordinated campaign against Britain ended. During the next several years, however, a small number of radicals tried to keep the controversy alive. Their goal was not accommodation, but independence. Oh, and I just heard or was watching a YouTube video, and they were asking the kids, did they know about the history of the area? And they were here. Samuel Adams, they were at his monument. Samuel Adams of Massachusetts was the most effective. He wrote newspaper articles and made speeches appealing to the colonists' democratic instincts. He helped organize committees throughout the colonies that became the basis of a revolutionary movement. By 1773, the movement had attracted colonial traders who were angry with the British attempts to regulate the tea trade. And in December, a group of men sneaked on to 3 British ships in the Boston Harbor. Now, remember this. And they dumped their cargo of tea overboard. So they were sending tea here to be sold taxed, okay? To punish Massachusetts for the vandalism, The British Parliament closed the port of Boston and restricted local authority. The new measures, dubbed the Intolerable Acts, backfired. Rather than isolate one colony, they rallied the others. All the colonies except Georgia, go figure, that's one rhyme, go figure, except Georgia sent representatives to Philadelphia in September 1774 to discuss their present unhappy state. It was the first Continental Congress. The colonists felt a growing sense of frustration and anger over British encroachment on their rights, yet by no means was there unanimity of thought on what should be done. Loyalists wanted to remain subjects of the king. Moderates favored compromise to produce a more acceptable relationship with the British government, and revolutionaries wanted to compete independence. They began stockpiling weapons and mobilizing forces, waiting for the day they would have to fight for it. Okay, so they were ready to go to war. And that's how we won, the revolutionaries. Now, y'all gonna have to wait 1 second. I have to go and get me something to drink. I'm gonna prop my phone up. Just bear with me. Don't be mad. It's not gonna take that long. Give me 1 second. I'm back. Sorry. Well, not really, but pardon me, I should say. Sorry. Okay. The American Revolution, its war for independence from Britain, began as a small skirmish between British troops and armed colonists on April 19, 1775. The British had set out from Boston Massachusetts to seize weapons and ammunition that revolutionary colonists had collected in nearby villages. At Lexington, they met a group of Minutemen who got their name because they were said to, and this reminds me of what's going on now, they're trying to collect your guns. Like I said, I'll go back through the pictures. Let me finish the sentence. To be ready to fight in a minute. Now, the Minutemen were intended only a silent protest, and their leader told them not to shoot unless fired on first. The British ordered the Minutemen to disperse, and they compiled. As they were withdrawing, someone fired a shot. The British troops attacked the Minutemen with guns and bayonets. And, I mean, they keep saying that our government ordered all these bayonets. I'm going to look it up. I didn't even want to see what it was, but since that is what they had then, I'm going to look it up with you all. Now, these are the pictures. Okay. The protest against the British tax is known as the Boston Tea Party. Look at the natives. So, hold on, y'all. I want to know if these are natives. Did they get the natives to throw the tea off the ships? That's what it looks like. Okay. So the Boston Tea Party, the natives threw the tea off the ships. That's what their picture looked like. Artist's depiction of the first shot of American Revolution fired at Lexington, Massachusetts on April 19, 1775. Local militia confronted British troops marching to seize colonial armaments in the nearby town of Concord. Okay. And with this, as Drop would say, I don't know the hijack on these pictures. I do know this is when men were wearing makeup. Like, dude, what's the problem? A drawing of revolutionary firebrand Patrick Henry standing to the left, uttering perhaps the most famous words in the American Revolution, "Give me liberty or give me death," in a debate before the Virginia Assembly in 1775. James Madison, fourth President of the United States, is often regarded as the father of the Constitution. His essays in the debate over ratification of the Constitution were collected with those of Alexander Hamilton and John Jay as the Federalist Papers. The Federalist Papers. Okay. Now, fighting broke out at other places along the road as the British soldiers in their bright red uniforms made their way back to Boston. More than 250 redcoats were killed or wounded. The Americans lost 93 men. Deadly clashes continued around Boston as colonial representatives hurried to Philadelphia to discuss the situation. A majority voted to go to war against Britain. They agreed to combine colonial militias into a continental army, and they appointed George Washington of Virginia as commander-in-chief. And that's Alexander Hamilton, Secretary of the Treasury in the administration of President George Washington. Hamilton advocated a strong federal government and the encouragement of industry. John Marshall, Chief Justice in the U.S. Supreme Court from 1801 to 1835, and a portrait by Alonzo Chappelle. Okay, now at the same time, however, this Second Continental Congress adopted a peace resolution urging King George III to prevent further hostilities. The king rejected it and on August 23rd declared that the American colonies were in rebellion. Calls for independence intensified in the coming months. Radical political theorist Thomas Paine helped crystallize the argument for separation in a pamphlet called Common Sense, which sold 100,000 copies. He attacked the idea of a hereditary monarchy. Paine presented two alternatives for America: continued submission under a tyrannical king, an outworn system of government, or liberty and happiness as a self-sufficient, independent republic. And for the republic for which it stands. How about it, people? The Second Continental Congress appointed a committee headed by Thomas Jefferson of Virginia to prepare a document outlining the colonies' grievances against the king and explaining their decision to break away. This Declaration of Independence was adopted on July 4th, 1776. The 4th of July has since been celebrated as America's Independence Day. The Declaration of Independence not only announced the new birth of a nation, it also set forth philosophy of human freedom that will become a dynamic force throughout the world. It drew upon the French and the British political ideas, especially those of John Locke in his Second Treaty on Government, reaffirming the belief that political rights are basic human rights and are thus universal. Declaring independence did not make Americans free. British forces routed Continental troops in New York from Long Island to New York City. They defeated the Americans at Brandywine, Pennsylvania, and occupied Philadelphia, forcing the Continental Congress to flee. American forces were victorious at Saratoga, New York, and at Trenton and Princeton in New Jersey. Yet George Washington continually struggled to get the men and materials he desperately needed. Decisive help came in 1778 when France recognized the United States and signed a bilateral defense treaty. Support from the French government, however, was based on geopolitical, not ideological reasons. France wanted to weaken the power of Britain, its long-time adversary. The fighting that began at Lexington, Massachusetts, continued for 8 years across a large portion of the continent. Battles were fought from Montreal, Canada, in the north to Savannah, Georgia, in the south. A huge British army surrendered at Yorktown, Virginia in 1781, yet the war dragged on with inconclusive results for another 2 years. A peace treaty was finally signed in Paris on April 15, 1783, and the revolution had a significance far beyond North America. It attracted the attention of Europe's political theorists and strengthened the concept of natural rights throughout the Western world. It attracted notables such as Thaddeus Kosciuszko, Friedrich von Steuben, and Marquis de Lafayette, who joined the revolution and hoped to transfer its liberal ideas to their own countries. The Treaty of Paris acknowledged the independence, freedom, and sovereignty of the 13 former American colonies, now states. The task of knitting them together in a new nation lay ahead. So that's where I'm going to stop at. And again, we are reading from Let Us Find the Truth. His website, USA History in brief, and it's on the last row, and that's in the public library. We also looked up, what's his name, Robert Penn. Don't quote me on it. We found out who the Norse were, the Scandinavians. And we found out about the 7 mythical cities. That's what the Spanish were looking for when they first came here. I'm going to close this out. I'm going to write down where I left off. We left off at the formation of a national government. So this is where they would form what we call now the government. And this was after becoming independent from the British. I'm just writing it down. So this is page 24 of 68. So we did good for my first go round of reading. Anything that I mispronounced, forgive me. Anything that I misquoted or anybody that I misquoted, please forgive me. I'm just trying to help out. And thank you for listening. Thank you to all of my brothers for teaching us, allowing us a sense of freedom. I mean, this far we're still war. What are we? War hostages. Is that right? Refugees. Something. All I know is the war is against us, and I would like to thank all the brothers and the sisters that are bringing out this information. It is giving me a new sense of freedom just in knowing who I am, and I've shared it with people. Please go support Lex Will, the Utah campaign. Just support. It's a common cause. Like he said, we're not gonna all get along, but at least all of us are of a common mindset to become independent, to get back to God's ways, our laws, and just loving on each other. That's my thing. Like, let's just love on each other. We have a lot of healing to do, so to speak. And I'm going to close this out with my desk art and the quote. And it says, when you want to destroy a people, you destroy the nature of their romantic love. You destroy their ability to love one another in a healthy sort of way. And that's Dr. Amos Wilson. And it just speaks volumes. I mean, like Lex was saying earlier, we don't even speak to each other in the store anymore. When I first moved here, I used to speak to people, and they would look at me like I have like 4 eyes on my forehead. So let's get to the healing. Like I said, go to Lex's page, GoFundMe for Yuta, and all praise to Haya. Good night, family.